I discovered that we are 30 minutes behind the schedule. We have discussed too much in the initial stage.
It actually, well, it was planned to be 1.5 day session.
Yes, yes, that's
And
right.
somehow we are jamming into 4 hour window.
Right.
If there is no COVID, we should be in Lublin, Poland, and
That's right. So we have to discuss it fully within 1.5 days. But now, should we have a 1.5 day session? Now the session 2, we have titled Actors and Institutions, so the case study. And in place of ASEAN to be presented later by Lei Hui, we'd like to put Anna's and Charles' presentation here. But first of all, I'd like to invite Sebastian and Mireia to present China, the EU, and connectivity.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Mireia, would you like to share the PPT? Do you have it at hand? No? Okay, then let me see. Can I just... Okay, that works. Let me see. Okay, so you should see the PPT, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay, very good. Well, okay, let me start. However, Mireia, you can also then come in. Okay, so we came up with the title, and that is China, the EU, and connectivity. And the structure of the chapter would look like this. That is first to have an introductory part, and that looks at the issue of the phenomenon of connectivity and EU-China relations. So it gives a kind of overview and introduces to the issue at hand. And then we look into 3 issue areas that we deem as important here. Well, that is new technologies and COVID-19 and health governance, COVID-19 pandemics particularly, and then trade. And relate those 3 issue areas, policy areas to connectivity before concluding in the final chapter. In the introduction, we'd refer to the international context, that is the decline of the liberal international order, the challenges, and well, so we already discussed this in the first part of our workshop. And then we come up, so the idea obviously is to also link this to the conceptual chapters, or that the conceptual chapters can link to cross-link, create cross-links to this, to our chapter here. And then we have a couple of questions, research questions. So how is connectivity understood in China and by whom? And how is it understood in the EU, and why and how is connectivity having an impact on EU-China relations? Well, we do this by applying, doing case studies. First, new technologies and digital connectivity. Mireia, would you like to take over?
Can you hear me now well without interruptions? Yes. Finally, good. I'm sorry for that. Well, in this section, the dimension is to examine within new technologies two particular that are also linked, and also they are linked to the digital connectivity component. And then there will be some elements that obviously touch upon, for example, market or regulation, and some of the actors. So the idea is also to select, for example, for semiconductors or data governance issues that are linked or could be linked to different actors as well. And well, the main idea so far is what you can see in this PPT, but obviously we haven't started to dig or to investigate in deep. So it might change, a little bit. But yeah, I think the other aspect for semiconductors, it's a bit controversial in the EU side, but also, for example, with South Korea, it might be with China. So it could be also quite interesting for us to present it as a more attractive, let's say. And data governance is quite relevant in the case of the EU, especially for the different strategies that are coming across and with the interoperability. So we thought these two cases will be quite relevant for the topic. I think, Sebastian, with this, we can move to the other component.
Yep.
Should I follow, or do you? Sorry, I cannot be.
Well, okay, and then we can just yeah, I'll continue. So then we have connectivity and COVID-19. So here we'd look at the China's actions, China's role with regard to its global role with regard to the pandemic. It's self-declared China as a self-declared responsible global actor, and also making use of the of what Beijing calls the Health Silk Road. That certainly is related to so-called mask and vaccine diplomacy, an issue of contestation, to say the least. There are obviously, this is a big topic. We have to see in how far, for instance, member states, that is the EU member states level, will be covered by us as well. Hungary, for instance, being the only EU country, as far as I know, that makes that also makes use of Chinese vaccines, and the and the implications for a coherent European, that is EU, position. And then there is the question of international cooperation, so origin of the virus, WHO, and regulations, but also the question in how far EU or Europe Asian institutions, especially ASEM, can help to can provide a certain level of governance here. The ASEM foreign ministers having issued a statement on on Corona last year, that would be in one document that we can refer to here. And then there is connectivity and trade. So China's economic recovery from the pandemic, and its implications for well, for the international economy, but also for Europe. So here we look at different speeds of recovery, and then also the regional integration aspect, that is the reshaping of the global economic relationship, and the fact that there is well, that the gravity center of the global economy, because of especially China's speedy recovery, is even faster moving towards the Asia Pacific, and that would then allow us to look at the European recovery plans here, economic recovery plans on the one hand, but also possibly the impact of regional trade agreements in the Asia Pacific, especially RCEP, CPTPP, possibly as well. That then should allow us to draw conclusions that will look at the issue of dependence, and the quest for diversification in the global economy, which is linked to aspects of sovereignty, obviously, and but at the same time, the need for interoperability when it comes to technological issues and institutional issues as well. From the EU's perspective, there is a need for what they call an open and connected supply chains management. So on the one hand, autonomy is needed, and at the same time, protectionism should be opposed. So that is now called open and connected supply chains. And then pandemic control, as well as regulatory frameworks are needed when it comes to those three areas. We could then, or we would then also refer to the implications for EU-China trade relations. The question of trade imbalances, the competition and market barriers, and well, possibly the CAI as well, the Indo-Pacific strategy, and also the application of sanctions by both the EU and China. Yeah, so we are thinking of a couple of working hypotheses here. So there are two different approaches to connectivity. That is on the Chinese side and the EU side. But there is a process of convergence of European and Chinese concepts. And that would then, because there is an increasing importance of geopolitical thinking, and then those cases that we look at, they present challenges and opportunities for cooperation. The connectivity strategies, both from China and from the EU, they started off on the regional or trans-regional, and they are now including, well, they are now also including the global level. That applies to the Belt and Road Initiative, and possibly also the EU connectivity strategy. That is the new one that is to be worked on. At least this is what the European Parliament is asking for. So, for instance, Africa needs to be included in the strategic thinking here. So all that leads then to the question whether interdependence or coexistence is the paradigm that concept that shapes international relations, that shape especially EU-China relations in the coming future. Meaning that we have, on the one hand, an economic rationale that's especially driven by private actors that, well, ask for more cooperation, whereas and connectivity, whereas the political, the normative and institutional factors currently are pointing into the opposite direction, decoupling, and from that follows this notion of coexistence as the other extreme on this spectrum. Yeah, and that would then be the chapter as we conceptualize it content-wise currently. Yeah.
Thank you, Sebastian and Mireya. Can I now invite Dr. Jo Dong-hee to present your concept?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so let me share my slide as well. Okay, so first of all, I'm very happy to join this project, and because I only joined very recently, I haven't developed the concept very much concrete, but I hope that I could make it more concrete and a valuable contribution to the whole project during the course. So I made my title as the FTA's role in strengthening connectivity, the case of the Korea-EU FTA. So what I thought I would do in my part is to first to have a review of the economics literature on to find relevant measures for economic connectivity, and to see what the related discussions are there in the economics literature about economic connectivity. Then I would like to apply those measures that I hopefully find in the literature to the case of the Korea-EU FTA. to see whether and how much the FTA has affected the economic connectivity between the two regions. And I also wanted to include in my analysis the scope of my analysis. I also wanted to include not only bilateral trade between Korea and the EU, but also value chains and the harmonization of standards and regulations between the two regions. Then, based on the findings, I would also like to draw some implications for the future development of the FTA, because we had the 10th anniversary of the Korea-EU FTA this year. We are in a very high time to be thinking about how to upgrade the Korea-EU FTA. So based on the findings in these chapters or sections 2, 3, 4, I want to draw some implications for the future of the Korea-EU FTA. Then I would conclude my part. And as I said before, I have only joined this project very recently, so I haven't made this my part very concrete yet. But here's what I plan to do, and if you have any suggestions, comments, I'll be very happy to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zhou. Now the third presentation would be made by Anna and Charles. Can I ask you both? And then after that, we start our discussion.
Okay, I could share. Yes, now I can try to share. All right. I can try, and then I leave the floor to Charles. So this chapter will turn its focus towards the EU as an organization, and probe sort of what we can see that is now doing in the area of connectivity, and if and how it's using its let's say its ability as a norm and rule setter in a way to sort of let's say strengthen its leadership position. So in one way, we are going to draw on the chapter number 2 of this book, and in another way, we're going to draw on the article that we wrote about 6 months ago about the EU's sort of leadership styles, and here we are going to apply them more in a more concrete way to the question whether or not the EU is developing or can develop global connectivity leadership in a new world order. So the starting point is to look towards the EU, and we can see that the EU is trying to develop its leadership, its power capacities in a number of dimensions. For instance, autonomy, it's trying to become more autonomous. It's as we discussed before, it knows that it's going to meet more resistance or competition. It will have to step up its ability to compete, and it's also going to have to see in which way and how it can project power. And this power, it's continued. We believe it's continuing to be defined as power based on norms, but the way in which it would use the norms would probably be quite different, at least in the sort of in the connectivity area. The norms are more towards how things are done in terms of global policy. So setting rules, achieving indicative goals, multilateralism, and so on. Then we're going to look into how the EU is now faring as a foreign policy actor. And we know that there is both a high degree of contestation within the EU in the foreign and security policy realm, but there is also continuing consensus about getting things done. And possibly this idea of that the EU is now standing more alone than before can sort of overcome the higher degree of contestation among some of its member states, and then possibly then leading to a higher consensus about what should be done. Then we're going to look at some of the means and methods. And one of that would be to look at how the EU is now sort of lifting its existing strategic partnerships to create links. The other one is to look at how the EU is then sort of lifting its global leadership in a number of areas, and with a particular focus on norms and setting rules. We haven't decided on cases, but I believe we'll have to look at a certain number of cases. So one would obviously be sustainability and climate. We look at the new rules concerning CO2 emissions and penalizing possibly third powers. Another would be in the policy area of global health. Could also be possibly trade and development in the sort of big broad development agenda. And that is something that Charles and I will have to decide which ones we finally sort of decide to examine more closely. So then I leave the floor to Charles.
Great, thank you, Anna. I think you did a good job of comprehensively covering where we are at and what we still need to decide. I think one of the things we're very interested in is this big question of how is connectivity expressed in practice in the EU as part of a broader EU strategy as being a global actor, the mechanisms it uses to practice world politics, and how this strategy has evolved, change, and how it's manifesting itself now. And I agree with Anna that we haven't exactly settled on the cases, but I think climate change is a good one. One could look at that from this broader sustainability and connectivity strategy in Asia and globally, and also contrast that with what the EU is doing with China, since it's been having a big bilateral strategy. They've been having these summits, and climate change is one of the areas where they have done, I would say, a pretty good job of trying to agree on a common vision. It'll be interesting to contrast those two areas, how the connectivity strategy in Asia promotes this, through energy, trade, aid, and setting standards, and then the EU's plans in partnership with China in that area as well. So that could be a potential, that's something we've discussed both in our last chapter, and I think is a good candidate for sort of a more specific look. Now, I think always when you're thinking about the EU's activeness, you'd like to have something about recognition and effectiveness, but that's a little bit difficult because there's a lot of goals on paper and hard to evaluate since these are plans of what it wants to achieve, and it's kind of hard to evaluate what it actually has achieved yet in goal attainment. And in terms of recognition, much like the discussion we had in the last session with Anna Sebastian's paper, while you can do a lot of mapping and study the conceptualization and look at the strategies, if you're going to do something with recognition, that requires a lot of time and resources. I've done a big study on EU civil protection cooperation with 670 survey responses in 17 countries and interviews in 19 countries and at DG ECHO, and that just is an enormous amount of time and resources. I mean, that took a couple of years to do that study, and we don't have the luxury of doing that here. So we have to do a little more quick and dirty using these primary source documents, more of a mapping and conceptualization exercise, which I think is appropriate for this type of project. But as always, we're open for good suggestions on strategies on how to operationalize what we're hoping to look at. So thank you.
Thanks a lot for 3 papers. And let's open the floor. Let's have a kind of free discussion. Tin Lee.
Okay, well, thank you very much for 3 wonderful presentation, and well, I'm sure those chapters will be great chapters. One of well, actually, especially well, mostly in common. I'm not sure whether other the colleagues would join, would agree on my point, but we've been used the term connectivity for last 2-3 years. And well, still my impression is the term was made in a very kind of optimistic, in a very optimistic way. Well, basically it talks about the bright side, like the future, in the future, okay? But in a number of issues, like well, the trade is one thing, especially related, well, to Sebastian's point there, especially related the issue of China. The connectivity agenda is not always kind of the peaceful and reconciliatory or cooperative. Certainly, it has lots of kind of competitive element, and that can be at the same time converted to the conflictual side. So I think if we are really kind of tackling these issues from a bit more critical perspective, not like denying the concept, but if we bring the issue more into, well, more on the ground, more down to earth, and if we add more kind of realistic color, then I think we may have to face at some point, what kind of major economic, geopolitical, or multilateral challenges this connectivity agenda will face. And China, most notably, will be one possibility. Recent European and EU's engagement in the Indo-Pacific area, and the European Indo-Pacific strategy will raise another source of friction, potentially with China. Multilateralism is certainly an option for the future, but what kind of multilateralism? And whether it is the Biden-led like-minded countries or the revival of the WTO and other existing mechanism, or new one like the reinforced ASEM or etc. So if we bring some more kind of more realistic and a little bit more critical perspective, I think we can enrich our discussion.
Thank you.
I was just going to say that I think that's some very interesting reflections, and I think that's one of the reasons we're interested in adding this geopolitical element to this, this idea that this is not necessarily just about Pacific cooperation that everyone agrees on. This is a competition, and in some ways, the last paper with the leadership strategies is you're competing to have your ideas and you're using things like your power resources, not just the force of your ideas, to try to influence how the rule-based order is or isn't shaped. So that's one of the things. I also think it's interesting to think about this in terms of a policy diffusion strategy. And if you think about the different mechanisms one has, it's been conceptualized in lots of different ways, but competition, which was discussed in the policy transmission paper in the last session. And there's also, of course, coercion. And then, of course, you know, if you're thinking about leading by example, you have the learning and emulation, isomorphic ways of trying to get your policy preferences diffused. I also think it's interesting to think about the fact that the EU is not involved in this quad. So you mentioned the Biden administration, and they're obviously much less isolationist and much more, once again, trying to take on a leadership role itself in terms of promoting its vision of a rule-based order. And I think it's interesting that the US has chosen to cooperate with Australia, India, and Japan, and the EU has been missing there. And I think that's also an interesting dimension of this. And the EU was able to kind of blame, rightfully so, Donald Trump for a lot, but it doesn't seem like the policy coordination has improved that much. For example, the EU cutting this deal with China prior to Biden taking office and against Biden's request. So that's kind of interesting. So I think you're right about this idea of the competition element. So thank you.
And if I may add something to that, I totally agree with Professor Lee that this connectivity should be also seen in the sense that we have the factors that favors connectivity, but we can also have factors that make it more difficult. So we can have sometimes this connectivity, right? So it would harmonize with our chapter in the first part of that book, because we will also show that there are some factors influencing negatively that connectivity. So yeah, I think this is important to see both sides, and it will enrich the research. So it's a kind of a general thought. If I may make some small comments to Mireya's and Sebastian's proposal. Really very ambitious in my opinion, because you mentioned about 3 huge dimensions or components, you named it like that. So like digital, COVID-19 and economic side, it's really huge areas, and I think it would deserve even separate articles on that, or chapters even. So this is really ambitious in my view. So it will be a challenge, but of course you are able to do that. So this was my also impression when I was reading your presentation. And to Dr. Joe also, I think it's really interesting, because it's a example of how it works, because we know that this free trade agreement between EU and Korea has invigorated the trade flows, and it is developing very well. So it's a visible sign of that economic policy and these cooperations agreements, they are working. Yeah, I think it will be really interesting part of the book. And I wonder, because there was also a space for Japan, which is maybe it will be covered also by the book. We don't know yet. So it would be interesting if we could, for example, compare the results of FTA between EU and Korea with that agreement with Japan. So just the idea of that. So yeah, thank you.
May I try to jump in and see if my connection works now? So first of all, thank you all for the comments. Going first to the first one, right, about the connectivity concept, and also a little bit link to what Tals was mentioning. Actually, when thinking about the chapter that Sebastian managed to write, we were first thinking also about the definition of connectivity from China and the EU, since there are some differences, and that already reflects what Professor Lee was mentioning, right? About it is not all that harmonized. In addition, the geopolitical element is key. So when it comes now to the Powell comment, indeed, we do agree that the three dimensions are a bit ambitious and there are too many elements inside. However, at first, what we wanted to think about it is, or what we wanted to start researching first is how to demonstrate those understandings in the connectivity and key areas that are in one side they are conflicting or competing, but at the same time they may reflect or they may provide some room for cooperation. So that was that's why we select specific dimensions that could bring this analysis. However, having said so, we are very aware of inside those dimensions there are many elements. So we will need to somehow narrow it and define it as we proceed in the research, right? Perhaps in the digital or new technologies, this is a bit shortened right now because we have advanced a little bit more. But in the other two dimensions, we intended to do it in the same way, right? To first present it and then narrow it. The other thing is actually we also include a bit more cases or elements in order to discuss with you to see directions and harmonizations, right, of the entire monograph book. So that's a little bit the explanation, but we are very aware that as it is currently is too ambitious, it won't be possible to cover all the aspects, that's for sure. And the same thing for the conflicting competition, not just the cooperation, indeed. But please, Sebastian, complement what I just mentioned.
Well, the term humble comes into my mind. You're right, Pavel. Thank you for pointing that out. We need to see how far we can actually implement it. Whether we will be able to look at all three dimensions, as Mireia has called them. I mean, the reason why we have put that forward is that there are these three topics do form part of other projects, so there is the hope to be able to extract the results and enrich them in a way that will then form a solid, coherent chapter here. But in how far that will be that is feasible, we need to see in the coming weeks. Yeah.
Can I add something about Pavel's comment?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a very nice idea. I think now that we have FDA and EPA in like major East Asian countries, we can compare them. What we could do, I think, is to compare agreements themselves, because for Japan, for Korea, we have data for 10 years after the FDA. So we have like enough data before, enough data after. But for Japan, we don't have much data to be able to have some quantitative assessment ex post. So I think it would be nice to have just the comparison between the two agreements can already give us interesting stories related to connectivity, economic connectivity? Which one is more connected in what area? And I guess EPA, Japan, EU, Japan, EPA is more modern, and simply because it's more recent. And so my expectation is to find if we have any relevant measure of economic connectivity applied to free trade agreements. My expectation is that we would have higher score for EU-Japan EPA than EU-Korea FTA because of the timing of the agreements. But I think it's a very nice suggestion.
So for that, let's see whether Levi is able to gain Koga's participation in our project as originally planned. I have a small clarification questions to Mireia and Sebastian. I like pretty much these 3 case studies: digital connectivity, COVID-19, and trade. However, if you take a look at the contents of each case study, probably the title could be changed. That is my initial kind of impression. If you take a look at the new technologies and the digital connectivity, then of course the semiconductors are playing a very crucial role in modern times, right? And this is related with new technology or new technologies. And it's taking too much space, in my view, for the title to be called digital connectivity. Of course, semiconductor is important, but the digital connectivity, when we look at the digital connectivity, then it could be containing things like data protection, the hacking problems. So positive and negative sides, but the section semiconductor is too much focusing on the problem of global supply chains, right? With the semiconductors as a very essential part and component. So I was wondering whether the title could be changed to New Technologies and Global Supply Chains. That also is quite important, right? But you mean you wanted to write about digital connectivity, then probably the focus could be changed a little bit. Semiconductor thing could be then put to the trade section, focusing on global supply chains. That is my so initial idea. And also connectivity and COVID-19. COVID-19, in my impression, is too current, is too much today's problem. So whether it could be changed to connectivity and pandemic, then probably we could do a little bit more colorful study. That is probably my foolish question or comment. So that was my comment.
Oh, yeah. Let's see. I mean, obviously, the idea here was that we have a certain coherence. We have digital connectivity. We have well, there is COVID-19, and then that relates to the question of health governance. I mean, COVID has it that the whole notion is one reason why the whole notion of connectivity is conceptualized. I mean, the fact how, I mean, and it's the China factor that explains it. So, I mean, bringing in COVID-19, I think is quite. There are good reasons to do that. However, any study is limited because, as you said, it's ongoing. It's so one has to be clear here. What about the limitations? Sure, yes, but. I mean, that is also a bit related to the paper by Pavel and Tomasz that we will discuss in a couple of well soon, you know, because there the COVID-19 is not mentioned, and I was thinking, well, maybe it's necessary. So the question really is, how do we treat? How do we deal with this variable? And I think it's needed to explain at least what can be observed currently. But yeah, well, and for digital connectivity. Yes, I see the point. We need to we will look into it where we have the most empirical data. I think that is also driving our concerns. So yeah, let's see. I mean, you can certainly make a point that the semiconductor sector is key for any digital connectivity, and by arguing that way, you bring it in. Sure, yes. Yeah, or moving it to the trade section and with regard to supply chains. Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe that is also something that we can, where we have some leeway to rearrange with Pavel and Tomasz, because you're also dealing with trade and supply chains. So yeah.
So it's up to you. I mean,
yeah, of course. But I think it's very good to share. To share our reactions here.
okay, can we go over? Any other comments? So let's then finish our session 2. And Anna, you are released from this obligation. See you soon again. We will discuss the planning for the
See you
future
soon.
and
Yes.
then let you know. Okay.
Yeah, let me know.
Thank you.
All right.
And
All the best.
bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Take good
Charles,
care.
you are staying? Okay. Bye. So do we deserve some break or not?
5 minutes.
5
Yes, we
minutes?
do.
Okay, thank you. 5 minutes.
Okay.